I'm Sarah Lomax, co-founder and president of URL Media and president and CEO of Word Radio.
And I'm Mitra Khalida, co-founder and CEO of URL Media and co-founder and publisher of Epicenter NYC.
And this is Twice as Good. So, Mitra, last week we did a very powerful field trip, I'll say, to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And this was a trip that preceded the Online News Association's annual conference in Atlanta. And so we took about 17 people to the Legacy Museum. And this was your idea to do something that was uniquely URL. And instead of doing a reception or something kind of, I guess I'd say stereotypical, you came up with this idea of taking a trip to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And so I wanted to kick things off asking you why you chose that concept to, instead of, in lieu of like a traditional gathering at a conference.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should begin by saying that the year that the Legacy Museum opened, which is under the umbrella of the Equal Justice Institute
Initiative.
The Equal Justice Initiative. When it opened in 2018, I happened to go with my family. My work at the time took me to Atlanta a lot, and my kids had like a break. And I had then a 7-year-old who, you guys, we'll introduce Leonor in a moment, but you guys will know, like, when your kid is 7, when they're starting to learn about civil rights, like the greatest point of entry in U.S. schools is Martin Luther King. This usually happens on MLK Day. And so I had a 7-year-old as my younger child who was obsessed with Martin Luther King Jr. And I felt like, because I go to Atlanta so often for work, like the next school vacation will tuck in some of her interest in this and get to see his boyhood home in the King Center. This child just sort of became obsessed with his marches and the bridge and his original. Again, when you have a child who's like really interested in this stuff, they sort of go down a rabbit hole. Anyway, that's how we ended up learning about this new civil rights museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And I have to say, as a family trip, I was a little concerned about it being very raw, because informally, one of the memorials, there's 3 sites, which we could kind of explain in a moment, but one of the sites is called the Lynching Memorial. And I worried about this, but on the other hand, we tend to be pretty open in our home, and this is the history of the United States. Like, lynching is a big part of that. And I had never heard about a museum that kind of put these horrors on display. And I think that's an important distinction of like going to a museum as a tourist site. And I emerged in 2018 saying, everybody in the world needs to come here. And so for the last few years, like if I hear about people like looking for stuff, I'll just be like, listen, this thing is a must do. Let's fast forward to, when you and I were brainstorming around the Online News Association, which was in Atlanta this year. We've thrown parties for URL Media before. We're so grateful. This is our 4th year of operation. I think we throw a great party. You and Leonor, who I swear we'll introduce in a moment, are usually the people on the dance floor. And but we're in a very different moment this year. And I felt like, with the rollbacks in DEI, with an election upon us, with even kind of this return after COVID to gathering being sometimes very frivolous, I guess I just didn't want us to throw another party. And I was like, how do we do something meaningful? Because when URL launched in 2020, our reason for existence, like the world got it, you know? And so quickly the world forgot, right? Because of these rollbacks. Now, I don't think anyone on our team has forgotten why we exist. Um, I don't think our people in our communities that we're serving with our media partners and our outlets have forgotten why we exist. But so I think, and this maybe brings us to the museum, and we could introduce our third guest. I think this is one of the most powerful experiences to understand not just civil rights history, but US history. And so, in order for us to understand why this moment feels so fraught, um, you know, I kind of thought, well, maybe we need to do something small, intimate. What if we took everybody for, like 10 hours and immerse them in these horrors, but also the resilience of our communities. I'll pause there. And Sarah, do you want to just introduce Leonor so we could
Sure,
for the con-
sure. Well, yeah, so Leonor Ayala is with us. Leonor is the head of our recruitment division at URL, and she was part of the bus trip to the Legacy Museum. And, we all were very deeply touched by this experience, and we are all coming from it from a different vantage point. Obviously I'm African American. And so when I stepped into the, the first exhibit, which was about the Middle Passage, it gripped me and I got a lump in my throat just instantly walking in. And it got more and more and more intense emotionally as I went through the entire Legacy Museum. But Leonor, why don't you jump in and just give us some thoughts, reflections of your takeaways from the Legacy Museum and that equal justice initiative experience in the three spaces.
Yeah, I would say that that's right. Like it starts off really strong, right? With that imagery of Africans being carted and trafficked to the United States. And as you move through, you get this real sense of just weight about what Africans experienced on the shores once they arrived, how they were forced into labor. And as you continue to go through, the number of people that were part of the trade, that were forced into labor, and then, it continues into segregation once Black Americans were freed. And what really sticks with me is all of it, but leading to present day where we're facing this mass incarceration crisis, and have been for a long time, seeing the coverage throughout time of lynchings, the headlines, and thinking about it from a journalist point of view, and thinking, I've been told in most of my career to be objective, and that to be objective, I could not be part of the group I was covering. So as a Latina, sometimes I was told, like, you're not objective enough to cover X story. And as I looked at headlines of from newspapers covering lynchings, it was like celebrating the lynchings, and picturing white people celebrating the death and lynching of someone right behind them. I found that so horrific, and hadn't really seen that before. Read about it, and to Mitra's point, like, you read about this period in history, but it's something else to really walk through and see the numbers, the sheer horror, like the how we documented this time in history, through newspapers, and this idea of objectivity in news coverage I've always questioned, and it made me think more about that, and how do we teach and talk about this in newsrooms in a way that is productive and moves the conversation forward, because I don't think we've always done that. And I'll pause there because there's just so much to talk about. And the mass incarceration piece I do want to get to, but I think I want to pause there and like, I don't know what you all thought about
Well, I
that.
want to ask Sarah. So, I mean, I think of Sarah as very steeped in civil rights history. She lives in Philadelphia. She runs a Black radio station. I feel like you're talking about history all day long, and you bring into it quite often. And yet, this was still quite an experience for you. So I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of the rendering of Black history in the United States, in terms of the rendering of U.S. history and its fullness, do you have any reflections on why this museum worked for you in terms of that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the specificity of the information. So, we as Americans, Black history, African American history always gets short shrift. I was raised in the 70s, and it was Crispus Attucks who was the first person to be shot in the Revolutionary War. He was a Black man, and that was basically all you learned about Crispus Attucks. And then it's Martin Luther King, and there's not a whole lot in between. There's not anything dealing with the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage. And so I think that the specificity of this museum, saying that there were 12 million Africans who were trafficked to the West, and to the Caribbean and South America, and all of those, and the U.S. 2 million of them died in the Middle Passage. There were 36,000 voyages that comprise the transatlantic slave trade, where all of these enslaved and captured Africans who were fathers and mothers and children and aunts, and they were people. And so I think that drawing that through line with such detail and accuracy from the Middle Passage to mass incarceration, with a real multimedia execution. So it just steeped you consistently in the humanity of, and the tragedy of, enslavement and segregation and Jim Crow and mass incarceration. It humanized the individuals who have suffered American terror. And on the flip side, it put a bright spotlight on the inhumanity of white supremacy and the commitment, the deep commitment that this country has had to white supremacy and racism and oppression of Black people and Native American people initially, and it has evolved from there. And so, to see it all so clearly displayed and articulated and curated was just it was very, very emotionally trying, because it was like, oh, all of these lies that we've been told and are still being told about how Black people are stupid and lazy and criminal, it's all a big effing lie. And so, and then, the resilience part is, and still we rise, and still we're here. And despite the lynchings and all of the laws and the social action and the political, all of the things that actually became the blueprint for the Nazis. We saw that in Caste. Like all of that stuff was enacted upon my people, and still we're here. So that phrase, "We are our ancestors' wildest dreams," is so true. It's so profound. And so it just, it was a real, I'm still processing, and, I'm getting a little verklempt as I'm talking, but
Yeah.
I agree with you, Mitra. Every person should go to that museum.
Yeah. I was struck by the number of organized tours around us. And I was going to ask more about this because, she's working in recruitment, works with a lot of companies that are um, trying to turn around their DEI efforts still. I know we can also talk about the rollbacks. But the day that we were there, Walmart had its employees there.
Mm.
And so that was, a diverse group, but not a largely African American group. And it seems like they get a lot of companies that are sending folks as a part of their own learning of history. So, Leo, I just wondered if there was anything that struck in that action, because you do work with a lot of companies. And, were there some tie-ins you saw from then till now?
So I would say that given the chilling effect the repeal of affirmative action has had, the repeal of affirmative action in higher education has had on industry and workplaces is real. We've seen it. We've seen it in the way that we need to, as recruiters that center diversity, equity, and inclusion, not use diversity, equity, inclusion, and just use the inclusion piece of that. So I think it is very to see companies like Walmart and other workplaces investing money, time, and energy and in really getting their employees to the museum and the legacy sites is heartening. And it makes me feel that, we're having these conversations now about diversity, equity, and inclusion shrouded in coded language because we're afraid someone's going to feel left out,
Or get sued.
or
I
get
think that's
sued.
why people
Yeah.
are changing the language. It's not because they're afraid people are going to feel left out. They're afraid they're going to get sued.
Well, yes, very true. Because the people are saying we're left out. We are not part of this, right? So I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue you, X company, because I feel not included. So I do think it's important to recognize those companies that are still trying to push this work forward. I would love to see more workplaces invest in this, and I feel very fortunate that I work at URL Media, where we center these experiences and we really embrace learning as a team and going there as a team and bringing people into the fold, because it is important. I mean, you talked about your daughter at the beginning of this and how interested she is in this period in time, and I grew up really learning about African American history all the time because of where I grew up. And the school district was largely Black and largely Latino. And so, even though I had that advantage of learning African American history from the very beginning of my education, it is very different to walk through the sites. And you were talking about the lynching memorial, and as I walked through with a couple of colleagues and we started to go, like there was the incline, like it just went down, and you're under these like huge slabs of rock. Like it all dawned on us in that moment, like this is evocative of like what it would be like to witness a lynching and the horror of that. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it again, and yeah, it's very different to experience history in this way. And I, not, hats off to the people who took so much time to think about how this would feel, how this might really honor people who came before us and really suffered greatly, to really open the door for many of us in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So
And
I
think
hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It's and I there was one part of me that wondered, like, what are all these white people around us thinking? I'll be
Yeah,
right.
same.
There was another part that was like, oh, they're here because their employer sent them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, if I want everyone to see it, nothing like being forced to see it, right? So
Right.
I had a little bit of a Yeah, you answer that. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I also think that the moment that we're in right now with this very pivotal election, um, and how polarized we are as a country, and this slogan of MAGA, make America great again, and like that museum experience really it very clearly shows that America was never great for Black people. And so this idea that, oh, we want to go back to the good old days, when white people were very clearly in a position to excel because they were stepping on the backs and the necks of Black people and other people. And so, it for me, there were a couple of things. There was a display of all these white segregationists and the quotes that they had said about how invested and how committed they were to segregation, and they would never bend. And to me, that is like the modern day Trump rallies are those people. And when I see the happy, laughing, picture taking white people at these horrific lynchings, I'm like, oh, these I see the current manifestation of these people in some of these rallies in Charlottesville when that happened.
Mhm.
And so and the Proud Boys and all of these things. And
Mhm.
so, like, we are destined, until America really has a racial reckoning, which we thought there was a glimmer of it in 2020. But until America has a real racial healing, reconciliation, and healing, we are doomed to keep repeating our history, which is what we are seeing right now, with it being neck and neck between somebody who is like a clear, rabid racist in Donald Trump and someone who is a clearly qualified progressive in Kamala Harris, and yet this country is like almost evenly divided, and it's just mind blowing. It's mind blowing, and to me it informs how we need to be looking at this election when you put it within the context of what American history truly is as it relates to white supremacy and racial discrimination. And so I think that, to me, it energized me to be even more, um, you know, just committed to educating and empowering people around what it means to vote, because they had a whole like
Mhm.
display about the poll taxes and the different things. But again, that specificity, they actually had a test of what Black people had to. They had 3 minutes to go through this test, and there were the most ridiculous questions, like how many seeds are in a watermelon, how many jelly beans are in this jar. Impossible to answer, and
Right.
that was very cleverly done to disenfranchise people of their right to vote. And we're seeing modern manifestations of ways to disenfranchise people to vote. So all of this stuff just kind of provides context and perspective on how we're kind of repeating history right now.
Yeah, I wanted to get some like really what stuck with you and any final takeaways from all of us. But one other thing I just wanted to mention was the unapologetic nature of these institutions, which in this moment that we're in, and you both have alluded to it, right? Where um, let's make people feel okay by accommodating them in this way. And that being said, what I felt emboldened by was this had a, a, a clear point of view, but was so rooted in fact, and it didn't absolve white Americans of their role in this at every turn. And I think that was why it might be different from other renderings of African American history. even during one recording I was listening to, they talked about how the enslaved people were stacked in very close quarters, and it made moving and going to the bathroom and hygiene impossible. And they said in between them were their enslavers who did not seem bothered by this picture, according to historical description and some journals. I mean, meaning it was rooted in how they knew that, right? And I feel like that latter part of how this landed with the people who were responsible for it has largely been erased from history. And so there was something about that responsibility. Like you don't hear about reparations like we used to talk about it 5 years ago, right? And there were just so many aspects where I wondered about my own complicit nature of being like, oh, let's just take what we can get, right? And not rock the boat too much. And that really, I just thought the execution of this museum was inspiring in, um, be honest here, like not even take more than you could get, just be honest about what
Hmm.
got us here. And I think so much of URL Media in its founding was rooted in our people being under resourced and yet the glue of their communities, the ties that bind their communities, and a necessary part of the fabric of their communities. And we're not resourced, and yet we're a necessary part of why things run. So there was just something that I'm really trying to tap into, to how do you keep that vision honest, just honest. It's not even like I need to be more fiery or anything, just honest.
Yeah, love that. Yeah. Leonor?
Yeah, Leonard, go ahead.
I would say for me, one of the things I'm taking away a lot, how it impacts my work. I'm more deeply committed to, I mean, unwavering doesn't describe how I feel about our mission in recruiting and retaining people of color and putting them in, helping them gain access to the jobs and have a seat at the table. There's that piece professionally. Personally, I shared with you all that um, I have two young boys who are, just entering phases of their education where they're starting to talk about this part of history. Definitely want to take them to the museum, but I think beyond that, we're in such a bubble where we live in San Francisco that I would love our bubble to be exposed to this history, and I'm really committed to bringing this experience and to the school. And I think the more we can bring in and talk about this history, and as you said, Mitra, um, unapologetically, this is the museum, and that we wanted to capture the horror, the racial terror that was inflicted on Black Americans. We gloss over it because it makes us uncomfortable, and this museum doesn't do that. So I think it's really important that to bring it back to what you said at the beginning, that all people visit this museum at some point. So, Sarah.
I think there's several takeaways, and I'll be processing for a long time, but the language, I think that they were very intentional about how they used language to describe this history. They did not say slaves. They said enslaved Africans and enslaved Black people. And I think that that's something, as people, as journalists and people in the media, we need to be very intentional and very deliberate about how we describe and define things, and using our words very, very carefully, because that can either um, increase humanity and the understanding of a people, as opposed to demonization and kind of dehumanizing a people, which I think has been done throughout history to Black people. I think the other thing is, I even though in public school I only learned about Crispus Attucks and Martin Luther King, my home environment, I was exposed to incredible contemporaries of my parents who were modern day civil rights activists in Philadelphia and educators and artists. And so I was exposed to really the brilliance and the greatness of Black people um, at home and in our family and in our culture, even though it was and it I guess it made it that much stark that it was not at all a part of my school experience. And so I also am just so amazed really at what my family, my father in particular, was able to achieve. And one of the things that kept really hitting me is that my father purchased the plantation where his ancestors were enslaved in Virginia, in King William, Virginia. And, when we go there, that is our ancestral homeland. And the house is a mile off of the road. And when we walk that road, we can feel our ancestors. And so to me, I always thought that that was like incredible karma for my father to buy this plantation where his great great grandmother was enslaved and then to buy like the 700 acres surrounding it. It was like a big, I think, middle finger to those who abused and used and profited from his and our ancestors. And so I just feel like we are a miracle to be where we are in this moment as Black people. And boy, do we have a long way to go. And that's my takeaway.
So before we wrap up, we had asked the folks who were with us to just share some reflections on the bus tour before they disembarked.
This one says, thank you for organizing this profound and timely visit to the Legacy Museum. It was eye-opening to see the direct through line of slavery's enduring and insidious impact on the concept of the American dream, to understand the complicity of finance and banking to the New England mills, to the incarceration industrial complex and current public policy. This will all stay with me. And, we didn't talk a lot about this, but the last piece of the exhibits in the museum really focus on the incarceration piece. And, that's something that I'm still processing and will stay with me. I think this idea too, Sarah, you were talking about the profound impact your father buying the plantation. I think a lot of people will say, not a lot, but I have heard this, and it's really disheartening, that will say, get over it, get over slavery, right? Like, I don't understand where that's come from, but this museum is important to make people understand, like, this is not something like you just get over, right? This is something that has, right. This is something that has permeated generations in the most insidious ways.
And it's still reverberating. And, like the get over it really minimizes and really like erases all the economic benefit that was accrued from like enslavement and then mass incarceration. Like all of these things also fueled the wealth of this country. And that's another part of the museum. And we can't end this without saying the name of Bryan Stevenson, who is the kind of brainchild, the spiritual energy, the creator of this museum and these three incredible experiences, distinct and aligned experiences. So, Bryan Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, the person who created the Legacy Museum, and I think the other museum is called the Peace and Justice Memorial that is
Right.
colloquially called the Lynching Museum, and
Right.
then the Sculpture Garden. And so, just real heartfelt gratitude and thanks and a deep bow to Brian Stevenson and his team for doing this amazing work.
I would love to read one more if we have time.
Yeah.
This is one of our funders, from one of our funders. The room in the Legacy Museum of the heads of enslaved Africans emerging from the sand as sounds of waves wash over you, that will stay with me. It beautifully preserves the memory of those who endured the grueling voyage and the many who did not make it. As a first-generation African, our communities tend to stand apart from Black Americans. This is a stark reminder that this is our shared legacy. White supremacy has scarred us all deeply, and yet we endure. This is a recommitment to the struggle against brutal oppression wherever it presents itself. Thank you, URL Media, for organizing this tour. P.S. I was shocked that half of New Yorkers personally owned enslaved Africans in 1730. The North is not absolved in this history.
It cannot be overstated or under recognized, because there were so many ways that white people were empowered to embrace and perpetuate slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. So on that, North is not absolved. Okay, we are going to wrap up. We could probably keep talking about this for a very long time, because this is something that has so much depth and breadth and complexity. And hopefully we will continue to unpack this and draw the connections. But for right now, we are going to wrap up. Thank you, Leonor. Thank you, Mitra. And this is Twice as Good. Visit our website, url-media.com, for more news and storytelling from our independent publishers. Thanks for joining us.